There's another apparent subculture of people that are getting into these vehicles to have sex.
Oh,
so,
no.
Yes.
Oh, jeez. Didn't need to know that.
When I heard this, I was like, oh my God, I cannot wait for this to come to Seattle because these are great stories. I was like, these are fantastic.
Okay. Where are you going with that? I was wondering,
like,
where are you going
with
that?
I wanted to be on top of covering those stories.
Okay. As long as you're on top of the stories.
Yes, on top of the stories. That's what I want to be on top of.
Hi, and welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We are coming to you from Seattle, where we get to report each day on what's happening around us in business, technology, and innovation. What happens here matters everywhere, and every week on this show, we talk about some of the most interesting and important trends in the news. Coming up later on, it is my AI, except it is John's AI. He's going to be talking with us about his experience with a Waymo driverless car. But first, John, I fibbed a little bit. I'm not in Seattle. I'm working remotely today, which
ties into our discussion. Yeah, perfect.
Big news from Amazon this week. Holy cow. And just to set the stage here, how many months ago was it that we heard a rumor that Amazon was going to be going from 3 to 5 days a week in the office? It was maybe six months?
Yeah, I think a little bit longer. Yeah, maybe 10 months ago. Yeah, it was right around the turn of the year, I think.
Do you recall the reaction when
Yes,
one of our
I'm
reporters...
glad you brought this up. It was one of the most, and I wasn't directly involved, but it was shared with me. And it was one of the most aggressive responses that they would, not that they would never consider it, but they basically questioned why we would ever even bring up such a topic.
I would go so far as to say they might have questioned our sanity.
Yeah, it was over the top, which I brought that up with somebody I was speaking to the other night, and they said, well, that was probably the reason you guys should have pursued the story further, because it was probably the biggest hint or tell that actually something was going on.
Absolutely. That is a good lesson learned in hindsight. So just to catch everybody up, if anybody missed this, Andy Jassy on Monday of this past week put out a memo saying, among other things, that Amazon will be, at the beginning of next year, requiring employees by default to be in the office for 5 days a week, up from the current 3. There's a lot more to the announcement. One of my favorite twists was they're getting rid of the shared workstations. It's going to be going to dedicated desks. I thought that was an interesting little nugget, and in part because it shows just how much they're trying to turn back the clock here. It's as if March 2020 never happened at Amazon when they go into 2025. And to me, it's fascinating. I got to tell you, I'm a little bit jealous in some ways. I'm envious of the notion that a company would try to recapture some of the magic that would happen in the office. But at the same time, as we talked about earlier, I'm coming to you from California. I'm visiting family this week. For a lot of people, if you were required to be working in the office, and I'm working this week remotely, that would just be no longer a possibility under a scenario like what Amazon announced this week. John, do you think this is going to be like a new reality? Is this the start of a trend?
I don't think so, because I think every company is different, and every company is approaching this in a very different manner and continues to do so. And I will stick to my point that COVID really changed behavior and changed the way workers and employees think about how they do their jobs. And the genie is out of the bottle. That said, I was interacting with some executives this week at an event in Seattle, and one of them had a very interesting comment when this was a hot topic of conversation. I should say a lot of people were bringing this up. Oh, Amazon's back 5 days a week. They're cutting their management ranks. They're trying to get less bureaucratic. His comment was, well, I guess my folks can't complain anymore about just being in the office 3 days a week. So it is setting a bar for others in a different way.
Amazon has become the bad cop to the good cop of the rest of the tech industry.
Yeah, so that was an interesting comment. I talked to another executive, Zhao Wang, the CEO of Boundless, who has really struggled with this issue at his company. It's a much smaller startup, and really had embraced the remote work, has employees all over, but has really now come to discover that there is a lot of benefit of being back in the office, and they were missing some of that serendipity and the innovation that was coming with that. And so they're starting to push more back towards the office with their Seattle based employees. So it is all over the map. I've got other theories on what's going on here with Amazon. I do want to talk about the management component of this and the bureaucracy, but maybe last point on what's happening here with the workforce in general. I don't know how many times I've been on this podcast and made the statement that the reason Amazon is doing this is because they want to drive additional attrition and reduce their workforce. And I brought this up with another executive at this event I was at this week, and he called it a silent riff, which I thought was a really interesting comment. And in essence, I think that's what they're doing. Two things. They grew so big so fast. I think they're trying to just stick with kind of the core diehard Amazon people who can recite those leadership principles backwards and forwards and return to that. And I think the other thing is they want to push some folks out. And so this is a way that they're going to continue to do that. I don't know, but I've said that so many times here on the podcast, right? I mean, that's nothing new.
Before we get into the management issues and what this says about where Amazon stands today, because I think that's a really important part of this, just the debate that this has reignited over remote, hybrid, in-person is fascinating. I touched base again this week with Vijay Raji, the CEO of StatSig. This is one of the companies that I talked with back in March. They are a startup that is full-time in the office as a baseline. And of course, there are exceptions, much as there will be with Amazon. If your basement floods or your kid's sick or something happens personally, there's an allowance to work from home. But the default at StatSig, as it will be at Amazon next year, is you're in the office. And I was giving Vijay a little bit of a hard time. I mean, he's kind of a trendsetter here in some ways. And his point was, yes, that is the ideal, but he thinks that Amazon effectively went through a one-way door here, that in many ways, Andy Jassy, the CEO, is trying to have them barge back through a door, and it's going to be very painful for the next 3 or 4 months to try and get these folks back on board. Whereas somebody like StatSig, they started from the very beginning as fully in the office. And that to me seems like the most realistic way to have 5 days a week in the office nowadays, because you either buy into it when you join the company or you don't, and you're not being forced back in by your executive leadership, which is effectively what's happening at Amazon.
Well, you should probably explain the one door, two door philosophy at Amazon, because I'm not sure if everyone gets that connection point.
This is a famous phrase by Jeff Bezos, and it gets down to a decision-making framework. And it is, if you're going through a door in making a decision that goes two ways, forwards and backwards if you screw up, hey, don't obsess about those decisions like you would a door that you walk through and you can't get back through. And that is really the framework that Bezos has established. And it's become a bit of a common way of thinking in the tech industry to kind of accelerate decision-making when you really shouldn't be wringing your hands. And here, Amazon has effectively been forced through a one-way door. So it's a little bit of a different situation. They didn't make a decision to do this, just like everybody else during the pandemic. They went remote and then hybrid. And I think Andy Jassy really hates this, hates the whole idea, is worried about where the company is. And John, that gets into a lot of the management issues that you're bringing up. And let's talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. Okay, big news from Amazon this week, John. Now, on this issue of Amazon's position, Andy Jassy didn't just say that they will be bringing folks back 5 days a week. He also said they're going to be reducing their management ranks to get rid of bureaucracy and process. And this, to me, taken together, said a lot about what Andy Jassy thinks about the state of this company right now. What did you read into it?
Totally agree with your assessment there. I think it's a company. You know, I was thinking back, and I had to look this up before the podcast. but in some ways, it reminded me of the Bill Gates memo in
Mm.
1995, the internet
The
tidal
internet
wave.
tidal
I
wave.
think I think this memo is as important of a memo in the tech industry as that one, as it relates to one of the most important technology companies that's trying to do something. They didn't mention AI here, which we'll get into that later, but I think that's a component of what's going on here. But the reason I think it is so important is that you have a company in Amazon that really, for most of its history, and it baffled us as reporters covering it, that it was able to retain this very innovative streak and startup streak, even as it got over 500,000, even over 1 million employees. It was able to keep innovating as a startup. And, this gets into the whole, it's still day one philosophy. And even in the memo, Jassy references, we want to operate like the world's largest startup. Well, to me, what that says is, well, we're not operating as the world's largest startup anymore. It is actually day two. And I think this scares the hell out of Amazon more than anything, because better than anybody that this is so rooted in their culture, that they are fearful that they have moved into this new era where they're big and bloated, like the Microsoft of the late 1990s and into the 2000s. And this scares the hell out of them. And I think this memo is a shout out to the investment community, the employee base, customers, everybody, that they're trying to bring in a new era at Amazon. And I mean, that's an incredibly hard thing to do. First off, it's an incredibly hard thing to do that what Amazon had already accomplished, that they operated as truly as kind of as a startup for as long as they did. And now that they've gotten away from that, can they get back to that type of mentality in the organization? So to me, the memo was fascinating in that it was so illuminating, and where, as you said, where Jassy's head is right now as he thinks about the company. And frankly, not in a great state.
100%. You referenced the comment about them wanting to operate like the world's largest startup. I read that in exactly the same way. There was another part that stood out to me. He said, quote, "As we have grown our teams as quickly and substantially as we have the last many years, we have understandably added a lot of managers. In that process, we've added more layers than we had before. It's created artifacts that we'd like to change. For example, pre-meetings for the decision meetings."
I had to read that 3 or 4 times. And it is really interesting.
He said there's a longer line of managers feeling like they need to review a topic before it moves forward, owners of initiatives feeling less like they should make recommendations because the decision will be made elsewhere, etc. John, you referenced the internet tidal wave memo. I think that's spot on. I think this also smacks of Microsoft in the mid 2000s, sort of the post antitrust era Microsoft, when you had all that growth, all that bureaucracy, and you've got that happening simultaneously here at Amazon with AI representing the internet tidal wave and the massive growth, 1.5 million employees and beyond that's happened. You've got those two things happening at once at Amazon. And I think that just makes it a very difficult situation.
Yeah, it's the internet tidal wave memo without recognizing or saying directly what the innovation is they missed by not being a startup for the last 3 or 5 years.
And along those lines, I actually was reading the tea leaves in the introduction to Jassy's memo. He said, "I feel good about the progress we're making. Stores, AWS, and advertising continue to grow on very large bases. Prime Video continues to expand, and new investment areas like Gen AI," he did mention that, Project Kuiper, their satellite venture, healthcare, and several others are evolving nicely. But it was really interesting to me there, he did not say Alexa, which really had the potential to be one of Amazon's pillars at one point and still does, and is the place where Amazon can really make its mark in terms of conversational AI with consumers, and they haven't yet. And you're talking about day one thinking. John, this is the opportunity for Amazon to apply day one thinking, to essentially start from scratch and use the Alexa presence to give itself momentum in the home in AI.
Where do you think this goes, Todd? I mean, do you think they can be successful in making this change? Do you think it is? I mean, obviously, it's going to drive out a certain level and a layer of management. I think it's going to drive out not only managers, but employees that are going to look for opportunities elsewhere, which, frankly, when you think about it in terms of the startup ecosystem in the Seattle market, it's a question we've asked for a long time. It's like, we really haven't seen as much activity out of Amazon employees, ex-Amazon employees. Of course, there are some great examples of companies that have been started by Amazon folks, but not to the level you'd think of when you look at a company like Amazon and the impact they have in Seattle. So, one of the things on my mind is, does this drive a certain number of employees into the startup ecosystem, either to join startups or build their own, which could create another wave of innovation and in this region, which we'll have to pay close attention to over the next few years. But I'm just curious.
I'm skeptical on that. I got to tell you, it feels like we've been waiting for that to happen forever.
It really
and it just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. I don't know why that is. It's just maybe it's a very entrepreneurial company, but so I don't know. How do you think this is going to shake out?
I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of attrition. I'm not sure if that's part of the goal. I think the bigger goal is really to get Amazon in a more entrepreneurial place. I do take Jassy's memo at face value. I feel like he's concerned. He's more candid than most CEOs are in this memo, and I think you got to give him some credit for that. A lot of people are going to be assessing this move through January and beyond, and I think we're not going to know the true outcome for years to come in terms of what Amazon starts now that comes to fruition in 3 to 5 years.
And another thing to watch is flow of talent to Microsoft. I mean, what does Microsoft do here as a big time competitor of Amazon and many businesses? Do they use this in their backyard to try to go after some of that talent?
And in the meantime, I have to tell you, it's going to be really interesting to watch just the technological cat and mouse game. I've seen a lot of posts already from some employees who say they're going to just coffee badge. And that's the phrase that's used for, you go in, you badge in, get a cup of coffee, log on to the network, and then go home and work the rest of the day. I think that's something Amazon's going to have to continue to battle technologically. And then it gets into this weird nanny state thing. And it's just, it's an odd situation.
Yeah. And I mean, to that point, I mean, Amazon is a global company at this point where oftentimes the people that are working in Seattle are working with teams in Europe or Asia or wherever. And so, it lends itself more to the remote work. If your team is in a very different time zone, to try to be in the office at the same time, that doesn't make sense. So it's certainly a challenge. I mean, to your point, Todd, I think I appreciate that Jassy's taking a stand and has a very strong viewpoint on how this is playing out, and how I just, first off, I disagree. I don't think this is what people want. I don't think this is how people want to work in 2024 and beyond.
I agree with you that it's not what people want. My question is it what innovation requires?
Well, that is a great point. And I think there are multiple studies saying that, yes, being in the office with that serendipity, and to the point that Zhao Wang at Boundless was making, it does matter to have people together working in the office. This, though, I think there's a way to accomplish that without going back to 5 days. This seems really stringent. And I don't think stringent works in the current workforce. But who knows? The other thing that, when we had Rich Barton of Zillow on the podcast, who's many months ago, and what he has shared with us in the past, which is a company that very much embraced the remote work
full
culture.
Remote.
Yeah, what is it? The Cloud HQ,
Cloud HQ,
which we made fun of them about, Cloud HQ.
Yeah.
But like very much a big embrace of this. But what he made a point of, which is interesting, and you may see this happen with Amazon. His point was, people started to self-select. Zillow does not get resumes from people anymore who want to work in an office 5 days a week. Like people now know the culture, they know what they're going to get, and so they are attracting the talent base of people that want that more fluid work environment for them. So there are a lot of people who want to work in the office and get a lot of benefit out of it, and the people that end up at Amazon will be those people. And at the end of the day, I guess what Jassy believes is that those people are going to drive that innovation, and the company is going to be better off as a result. So it's really interesting that there are so many different ways that executives are looking at this issue.
Well, we've been covering this one back and forth, everything from the impact on Amazon to the impact on Seattle's roads. So I will link to everything we covered.
Well,
you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, well, we should, because the people who probably applauded the Amazon 5 days in the office news more than anybody was the Downtown Seattle Association and the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce, who were probably went out and, had a couple shots as soon as they, heard this news. Because this is, this
in a good way,
in a big way,
celebratory,
good celebratory way, good way. Because boy, this is a real potential shot in the arm for Seattle and creating the critical mass that Seattle needs downtown to create the vibrancy. And so there's good news and there's bad news, which that means more people are going to be driving on the roads into downtown Seattle not just on Tuesday and Wednesday.
We'll link to everything that we talked about and we covered in the show notes. You can also look for the post on GeekWire.com, but we're not done yet, because we actually have a very special segment of My AI coming up, because it's not my AI, it's John's AI, involving a radically different experience that he had this week with a self-driving car. That's coming up next. You're listening to GeekWire, and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. John, I've actually got a theme song specific to this segment. I'm not going to play it now. I'm going to play it after it's done, because that's when it will make sense to everybody, okay?
All right.
Let's
cool.
set the stage for this first. And to do that properly, we actually have to go back to 2018.
I was just looking it up, Todd, when I had my last driverless car experience. So it was 2018
in Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh, yes. Okay,
in an Uber.
I was trying to find the date. Yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah. I think it was February or March 2018. We were in Pittsburgh, staffing up GeekWire HQ2, which is a whole other story that we won't get into here. And so you and our colleague Taylor Soper got into a self-driving Uber. What happened?
It was terrifying. It was not ready for prime time at all. At one point, we hit a pothole. Thankfully, there was a driver. At that point, they did not have enough confidence in the technology to send us out in a fully autonomous vehicle. There was
somebody sitting in the driver's seat that could theoretically not driving.
That could take control in case something happened, which we were very thankful they did, because it was not ready. And it really shook my faith in the whole concept of autonomous vehicles, which I've talked about on this podcast, that this is going to take forever. It's the regulation, let alone the technology. It was just not ready for prime time. So that was
hit a pothole. It jerked to a stop. It was scary.
It was scary. Yeah, it was not ready for prime time. So that was 6 years ago. So fast forward to my recent trip this week down to San Francisco as part of an event we were involved in related to Dreamforce. And within a few moments of being in the streets of San Francisco, you noticed Waymos. So the self-driving vehicles of Alphabet, Google, are all over the streets of San Francisco. I mean, if you stand on a corner in a busy intersection, you'll see one every 3 minutes. They're just very much prevalent. So I was like, I got to give this a shot and see if the technology has changed.
And so you got in and you actually did take a video, and I'll link to that from the show notes. We'll upload it to the GeekWire YouTube and share it with everybody.
I
What
took a
happened?
lot of videos because Todd,
Oh, you did?
yeah, I was very much in camera mode. I think I got this really cool one too, but so now you're gonna have to share this one too of like the street cars, with, I was just like, oh wow, the juxtaposition of the old transportation system with the new. And anyway, I was having a blast.
So there's
And
nobody in the driver's seat.
no,
Nobody.
no one in the driver's seat.
How'd it do?
Fantastic. A plus. I mean, I was blown away. And going from that experience where I was very much a skeptic. I mean, coming out of that Pittsburgh experience, I was not ready to embrace autonomous driving at all. I could not believe the way it performed. It was, it was a 5-star experience.
So are you ready for these things to be in Seattle? And
I am.
if they do arrive, are you going to start using them?
Yeah. I was that much of a believer. I thought it was really an excellent experience. And, I should say I took the Waymo from the neighborhood, the Bernal Heights neighborhood where I was staying, to down near the ferry terminal. And so it was about a 25-minute drive. So it was a pretty significant drive. And prior to doing so, I did compare Uber to the Waymo, and the Waymo was a few dollars cheaper, which was,
really,
that made it of interest, and makes some sense, right? I mean, you
don't have to pay the driver.
There's no driver cost. So
wow.
that was attractive. The entire experience from the very moment that the Waymo pulled up in front of the door of where I was staying, and it was just a great experience. Like, you are on your phone, you can unlock the door handle pops open, you get in, there's some nice pleasant music playing. It was, and then you just swipe to start your ride and you're off to the races.
And can you sit in the front seat if you want? Could you sit in the driver's seat?
No. They very much discourage that. In fact, I'll look up exactly the words they use to discourage folks from doing anything on the wheels. And we should say Waymo is operating in San Francisco, Phoenix, I believe LA, and just in the last week or so announced deals to go in, I think with Uber as a partner, into Atlanta and Dallas, but double check me on that.
We double checked afterward, and it's Atlanta and Austin.
They are expanding the service, and I really can't wait till it gets here. So, no, you can't sit in the driver's seat.
We'll do all the driving, so please don't touch the steering wheel or pedals during your ride. We may use interior cameras to check on riders, improve our products, and more. But our microphones are only on when you're connected to rider support. So sing your heart out. We can't hear you.
And in fact, there's a very explicit message on the wheel that says, please keep your hands off the wheel. The Waymo driver is in control at all times. So they don't want you messing around with the wheel. In fact, my buddy who lives in San Francisco said there's and I can't remember the name of the group. We'll have to look this up.
It's the Safe Street Rebels.
That is taking action against the Waymos by putting orange street cones on top of the camera on top of the vehicle, rendering it
the LiDAR.
Rendering the camera useless. So that's interesting. Now, I will say we had some colleagues who were in San Francisco at the same event that I was in, and after I was talking about this in such glowing terms and really had no problems. In fact, the vehicle would slow down with pedestrians coming in. You'll see in the video, there are like multiple pedestrians crossing. It could get dicey, and it performed very well. But some of our colleagues who took a Waymo had one incident where they had to call customer support because there was a stop sign that had been covered up with some construction equipment, and a lot of the cars that were being driven by actual humans could figure it out and just navigate through. But the Waymo they were in stopped and couldn't quite figure it out. Eventually they got it moving, but so it's not flawless, but boy, I got to say, my experience was top notch.
All right, John, as you know, with our My AI segment, we've been looking for theme music using AI. Most recently, we did a full episode. And in fact, I had our AI composer put together a song about your experience. Let's listen to it right now.
John Cook in a Waymo ride. 2018 was quite a slide. Uber's mess left him with dread. 2024 now clears his head. Tech journalist on the scene. GeekWire's boss knows what it means. Wow, by Waymo, tech so clean. Future bright where he's been. Waymo delight, oh so bright. 2018, such a fright. Now he's smiling.
So, John, how closely does that reflect your actual experience?
That's clever. That's clever. I know you love doing the AI music. So, the interesting thing about this as well is, like, I'm not a big user. I do not like cruise control in vehicles, and I don't like the concept of the Tesla autonomous driving. And I think that just brings up this interesting point. It's like, if I'm in control of a car myself, I want to be driving it and having full control. But I'm more than happy if, I'm in a Uber situation or a driverless, car with, I'm in the back seat and just can do my own thing. That's fine. So I don't know. That's just a difference. I know other people are different, but I'd want to be in control of the vehicle if I was in that driver's seat.
Do you know the phrase uncanny valley, where there's something that's in the middle of reality and fiction? And it comes up most often in the form of like androids that look almost human to the point where your brain wants to believe that it's real, but it can tell that something's wrong. That's what this feels like. It's like the transportation version of the uncanny valley, where you either want to be fully in control or you want to know that the technology is there and it is technology and it's doing its thing. And I think you're sort of in that in-between spot when you're doing something like cruise control, which, frankly, a lot of people are actually okay with.
Yeah. It was interesting. I loved it. So
very cool.
We need to figure out when they're coming to Seattle. Do we have any insights into that? I know that they've been discussing that, but
we had a writer, Jiaying Griegel, look into this. She went down to San Francisco and tried the Waymo and wrote about it for us. And as part of that process, I know we reached out to find out if they were coming to Seattle, and we have not heard yet when that might be happening. But given the expansion that you referenced earlier, I mean, geez, it seems like it would be a natural next step to come to the beautiful Pacific Northwest and try our hills.
Yeah, and that's a good point you bring up the hills, because, if you know the geography of San Francisco, it is very hilly, very challenging. Now, the weather patterns probably aren't as extreme as, it's not like snow and ice typically. But, boy, in terms of weird turns and strange streets, I mean, being able to navigate that, very impressed. It's really a cool experience, and I'm a believer now.
All right. Fun to catch up with you, John.
Good to see you, Todd. Enjoy California.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Curt Milton edited this episode. Until next time, I'm Todd Bishop.
And I'm John Cook.
We'll be back soon with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.